Hello, folks, and I hope you're doing well. I am deciding to try to break up into some individual video titles and categories on my personal stream here. So, this one I'm going to call Tech Talk because, again, the second part of the G of the three G's in the name is gaming and gaming related technology, which includes computers. And computers has been a hobby thing for me since the 90s and always through high school. So let's examine a recent story here that broke yesterday that is very big news when it comes to the CPU slash processor aspect of your home computer or the computer you use to access YouTube or game on. And this has to do with, uh, again, Jim Keller. And just quickly, people wonder where I get my sources from for technology information. Anintech.com, as seen here, is one of my sources that I used to, for a long time, used to read on a daily basis. Another one is Tom's Hardware. There is also very many YouTubers on YouTube as well. Linus Tech Tips YouTube channel, Tech of Tomorrow YouTube channel, Hardware Canucks for those that are Canadian. They have a channel, Hardware Canucks, to name a few. Now, getting back to this Tech Talk video, which is again the first one that I will try to do consistently enough, maybe hopefully one a week. Okay, we have here an article from anintech.com in regards to the big breaking news that occurred yesterday. The announcement that Jim Keller resigns from Intel effectively immediately, and this is Mr. Keller himself. Now, those who don't know anything about computers or whatnot, who the hell is Jim Keller? Well, as we read down here in the bottom, or down here in the article, Jim Keller was hired by Intel 2 years ago as a role as Senior Vice President of Intel's Silicon Engineering Group after a string of successes at Tesla, that's right, the electric car company, AMD, Apple Computers, AMD again, and PA Semiconductors. As far as we understood, Jim's goal inside Intel was to streamline a lot of the product development process on the silicon side, as well as provide strategic platforms through which future products can be developed and optimized to market. We also believe that Jim Keller had his hands in looking at Intel's manufacturing process, as well as a number of future products. I could go into more detail as in this article, but the point is here, as I like to say, for decades, Intel has brainwashed into individuals that if there is not an Intel processor inside your computer or computer device, it's not the right processor. They've always insisted that they have been number one, and that for the not have a system based on their products, you are not going to have a computer system, or you do not have a computer system. That is, again, the biggest crock of BS that you can be told as a consumer. I've always been an AMD supporter, always been a supporter of AMD before they actually bought ATI Technologies graphics card division as well as chipset division from them and melded them into AMD. The problem was way back in the day when AMD made that decision to acquire ATI, it put them in a very big hole of debt, which hampered their development of product. Luckily enough, Mr. Keller here, as noted by the AMD again, the second time around he came into development for AMD. If you wonder why recent AMD Ryzen processors have been actually doing as good or beating Intel in a competitive market, is because of this man, Mr. Keller, who actually was one of the big individuals behind the design of the Ryzen's graphics engine, or architecture, I should say. If it wasn't for him doing that, we today as consumers would actually not have a better chance at having fast technology at an affordable price. Just to put things into perspective of the landscape and how it's so important to not have one major company be a dominator of things in regards to computer technology. Let me take you back to when the earlier days of PC components. Back when AMD was still in existence, there was other third tier processor manufacturers such as a company called Cyrix, as well as a spin-off or part of that branding, which was actually IBM. Also made processors in the same time frame as well too. But back in the day, when you went looking for a motherboard, and we will put this at, say, that mid to late 90s. So when you went into your computer store and you went looking to buy a computer or build a computer, and so you walk in and you say, "Hey, I'd like to build a computer, or I'd like to buy a computer." "Sure, what would you want?" "I'd like the latest thing." So at that time, the latest thing was, again, an Intel system with a motherboard, and then basically whatever video card, sound card, and other components. But basically, your two core parts to your computer build were your processor / CPU and your motherboard. So the individual would say to you, "Okay, well, what do you want?" "Well, I want the best." "Well, then obviously you want Intel." "Oh yeah, sure. As long as it's a good price." So of course they tell you, "Well, I can build you a Pentium 100 megahertz Intel system with motherboard, and that system's going to be $6,000. And of course, you're going to be $6,000? That's crazy. And so here's the problem, is that Intel Pentium processor, being a premium product, is priced at about, at that point in time, I will say 20, we'll talk US dollars in this instance, $2,300 US. Your motherboard for to run that processor on your Intel motherboard was $1,000. So you're paying $3,300 in itself just for the processor and motherboard to run the components and the processor on. So, of course, you'd say, well, that's a crazy price. I don't want to pay that much. And then they'd be like, okay, well, I can sell you Intel's next tier down processor, which is a Celeron, at the same speed. And they'd think, oh, well, that's great. It's the same thing. It's just a tier down. Well, the problem is yeah, it's a tier down, but it isn't the same performance as the premium product. But what's the price difference? Basically, the Celeron version of the Pentium branded version processor from Intel was going to cost you $1,100 US. So, and you still had to use the same motherboard that was still an $1,100 motherboard. So you still were paying $2,200 for a processor and motherboard to have in your computer. That said, AMD was still around at the time, and their product, I believe, at the time was called the AMD K7 processor, which I think Jim Keller also did have a little bit of design aspect into it as well too. Now the difference is that person's like, okay, well, I can't afford Intel. Well, what else is there? Well, I can sell you an IBM processor, a Cyrix processor, or an AMD processor on a different motherboard. So the person's like, okay, well, what's that difference then? Said, well, I can sell you a processor for $400 from IBM or Cyrix that runs at 75 megahertz, but the motherboard is only $300. So you're still paying $700, but you're getting far inferior products at the time. And so then the person's, well, is there anything better? So the computer shop retailer or computer store owner could then offer you then a AMD K7 processor at 100 megahertz as well too, for at least a $500 price point. So a little bit more money, but you're still paying like $800 for a system. Now, the whole thing is, back at this point in time, in the early 90s, Intel had their mobile Pentium platform for laptops. The thing is, and this ties in ultimately to why I'm doing this video, is to educate individuals, is that Intel has been riding on their laurels since the late 90s. All of Intel's current processor architecture has been all based on that late 90s Pentium mobile platforms processor. So that's right. Intel, all these years, has not innovated with their products. None. It's basically been the same architecture from back in the 90s that they've just simply re-engineered, moved a little few things around here, or in the case of what Intel later did, a few years later when AMD actually introduced their dual-core processor, Intel's mindset was, we got to compete this because they're getting market share from us that is normally our share. Intel launched a product called the Pentium D, which, when you talk about heat from a product. It was absolutely terrible. And basically what it was it was somehow they sandwiched two of their Pentium cores onto one package and then were then selling those chips as dual core processors. Whereas AMD back at the time with their K was it K6 or no it was the AMD K7 or K62 or something along those lines. I'm a little bit lost. It is late at night when I'm doing this. Um, so basically, AMD was actually putting out true two core processor parts, whereas Intel's solution to try to save face and be competitive against what AMD had put out to market, they actually just simply took two of their existing mobile processors, glued them and stuck them down to another piece of PCB substrate, and called them the Pentium D processor for dual core. The inherent problem with the concept for Intel was, yeah, it had great possibilities. Yeah, it was a dual core, but it was the simple fact that the two chips could not run cool enough at the same time. So, if you're able to run them at the highest clock that they could run at the time, which I think we had reached the 2 gigahertz decade by then. So you could get dual cores 2 gigahertz on this Intel Pentium D chip. But the problem was the chip was pushing, we'll say, upwards of 400 watts of power through it. So you were needing a massive amount of cooling. You're also using a massive amount of energy. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you never had sufficient cooling, your system would run into all kinds of hiccups and problems. So, going back forward to the article in front of us, and the reason that this is a very big piece of news breaking technology wise is, again, as I mentioned earlier, Jim Keller himself was the guy who was the mind, the genius behind the design of the AMD Ryzen architecture. This architecture that has brought in AMD back into competition with Intel and has actually made it great for us, the consumer. And it put such a scare into Intel because of, again, them using a aged CPU architecture, and no one in their company had the foresight to think that any other manufacturer or somebody else would come out of the woodwork and create a competing level processor, which AMD has done over the years. But more so since the Ryzen architecture has launched for AMD, was it now 3-4 years now, Intel has felt that pressure and seeing that what AMD has done is something that's an evolving thing. They're not staying stagnant as Intel has done for the last 3 decades, riding on their laurels, riding on their mass advertisement, and, as I like to say, brainwashing and making people think that, oh, Intel is the best. There's nothing else better on the market. Everything else sucks unless it's Intel inside. So the problem was here's Intel seeing the new speed that AMD is bringing up onto them in technology and advancing, and seeing that they are on the verge of that they very well could surpass them like they did at one point in time in the 2000s for processor technology and in turn sales. So, what was Intel's big decision to do? 2 years ago, they brought in Mr. Keller. And basically, he was going to be Intel's savior that was going to save the company from the oncoming onslaught of Intel's technology advancing and advancing and not stopping advancing and becoming better than Intel's stagnant technology. So, when said announcement comes out about Jim Keller resigning from Intel effective immediately, anyone that is a diehard Intel user or a stock shareholder in Intel should very seriously take said information and run. Because, again, Mr. Keller has came into AMD twice and brought the AMD company at 2 points in times from almost near being bankruptcy to highly competitive against Intel products. Intel has brought Mr. Keller in to be able to alleviate that problem for Intel and make themselves competitive again and be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And mind you though, this is all with Intel owning their own fabrications, having billions upon billions of dollars to back up research and development on next computing technology. They bring Mr. Keller in to be the head of that and initiate that change in that company. Mr. Keller resigns. What does that tell you for anyone at Intel and anyone who is a general consumer of Intel product? It is very bad. Very, 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 very bad. Because if Mr. Keller was not able to turn around Intel's current situation, as he's done now twice for AMD, once for Apple, and 2 other various companies, what does that say about the future of Intel's company and their business and their innovations? Not very much good. So, again, when someone insists that Intel is the best, there's nothing better. Currently, no. 5+ years ago, it's very possible. But at the end of the day, when it's us, the consumers, it is very important for us to have a equal balance in the component technology and more so CPU technologies. We need to have not just one superior chip, we need to have 2 equally superior CPU manufacturers such as Intel and AMD. We need 2 of them in the market for us, the consumer, to benefit. And again, how does it benefit for us, the consumer? We get more advanced technology quicker. The pricing comes down quicker. Availability becomes quicker. This has also been another reason why not just the Ryzen architecture being a big thing for AMD, it's also the fact that AMD themselves actually gave up one of their own fabs and actually decided to go fabless. And it's actually made it to their advantage because they now can go to any chip manufacturing fab that is compatible with their designs, and they can say to them, we want you to produce 3,000 of our chips at this certain nanometer level a month. Can you do that? Yes. Money to them. They go to another one. Can you do the same thing? Maybe a little bit of a different spec product? Same thing. Can you do it? Yes. So AMD, not only through architecture, but also be going fabless instead of as what Intel is constantly dependent upon their own fabs that they have created, which I think they only have about 2 in the world. And not only is that, they were the best for the fabrication nanometer technology scaling at the time. Unfortunately, though, and this also feeds into Intel's problems, they have not been able to innovate with their scaling. They're still stuck on the same processor node, which is 14 nanometer or 10 nanometer, I think. Somewhere around there. It's not that bad. AMD, on the other hand, because they've went fabless, they have the ability to go to any fab slash semiconductor and say, here's our designs. How many of the chips can you do for us? And at, how much technology can you shrink it down to that you can produce? And so they turn around and they can have 5 fabs or facilities around the world pumping out their product at a faster rate than what Intel can put out. And in newer technology nodes. So example, I think all the Intel processors are on 10 nanometer right now. All the current AMD Ryzen processors that are out from the 3000 series are all on 7 nanometer, which is very, very small. Substantially small. And they can get not only their CPUs done on that level, they also can get their graphics cards chips done on that level. So that also gives them a bigger advantage. So, in summary, I know this is round and round, but again, big news of Jim Keller resigning from Intel. That is big news and a big, big, big problem for Intel in the future and going forward. So, if you're an Intel fan or you are thinking of buying Intel product in the future, I would very seriously consider AMD products. Hopefully you enjoyed this last 30 minutes of my little tech talk video I did here, folks. Again, thank yous again for stopping by, giving a view, giving a listen. Hope yous are all well. Take care, and bye for now.